Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Willingham, and together we will chew our way through Wokistan in search of an honest man, or woman, or they, them. I'm just kidding. There's nothing honest about any of that. Well, in light of the recent testimony, if that's the right word, of Mr. Fauci and his being trapped in the syringe of silence, I thought it might be pertinent to revisit a golden oldie from the disasters of woke. This concerns the COVID pandemic, and the essay is entitled Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws. As always, I open with a quote. Sun's up, looks okay. The world survives into another day, and I'm thinking about eternity. Some kind of ecstasy's got a hold on me. That's Bruce Cockburn from his song Wondering Where the Lions Are, from the album Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws, 1979. I was initially excited to learn that the great Canadian guitarist and songwriter Bruce Cockburn would be celebrating his 50-year career this month at the Academy of Music in Northampton. I'm an ardent fan, and I've seen him many times over the decades, but I'm not going to this show. The Academy of Music requires proof of vaccination for entry, and I adamantly refuse to pass through a moral checkpoint for any reason, and certainly not for art or entertainment. I am unemployed, partially as a result of this pandemic, and partially for refusing to take the knee in obedience to the woketocracy that is now academia. And I will not spend money to submit to what is essentially a pox tax to prove I am not a social contaminant. COVID mandates have long since ceased being about public health and safety and have been weaponized as another mechanism for sorting people into identity categories and controlling their behavior and presence in the public square. The star-belly sneetches have stars upon theirs. Isn't it fascinating how the people who claim to know what's best for us morally also seem to know what's best for us medically? They posture as experts on ethics and on epidemiology now, and the hysteria of the COVID pandemic has, among other things, revealed to those who do not have our best interests at heart how much we will put up with in terms of surveillance, restrictions, and demands on our behavior. Current COVID response is the triumph of therapeutic safetyism in the overindulged, risk-averse West. It is no coincidence that an increased insistence on religious fealty to the cult of woke has appeared under these conditions. They have the perfect cover under which to carry out the calculated polarizing that seems to boost their immunity to reason and decency and enable their crackpot diagnoses and remedies for our ostensible sicknesses of the soul. This is the mind virus we need to fight, and it is spreading and mutating faster than we can inoculate ourselves against it. Western Massachusetts is seething with the woke and their deluded pseudo-liberal sidekicks. Restaurants telling me what books I need to read to stop being racist. Bookstores telling me I not only need to read the right books, but I also need to punch Nazis. Theaters telling me I need to provide a purity certificate before I sit for 2 hours in the dark with a mask on alongside other vaccinated people. There isn't enough toilet paper on the planet to wipe this shit away, especially since the supply lines continue to be disrupted by the politically pusillanimous. There is a word for people who obsess over cleanliness and order and compulsively act out because of it. Crazy. And the word for people who obsess over and compulsively evaluate the moral worth of others is dangerous. Trumpsters put kids in cages, Obama's cages as it happens, and separated them from their parents. Wokesters put kids in masks and separated them from their childhood. Trumpsters fight unauthorized immigration with MAGA hats and border walls. Wokesters fight viral and ideological enemies with masks, vaccines, isolation, and increasingly, murder. Trumpsters staged a political tantrum at the U.S. Capitol, which the media scaremongered as a coup. Wokesters rioted unmasked in the streets for months before there was a vaccine, with the blessings of public health officials and the U.S. government. They seized sections of cities where police and EMTs were not allowed. They murdered dozens of people, destroyed billions of dollars in public and private property, and threw buckets of shit on people. You know, because they're just so full of love and justice, they can't help but get a little bit of it on you. Well, Like Bruce Cockburn sang, everybody loves to see justice done on somebody else. COVID vaccination isn't mandatory, so requiring it for entry into certain venues is overreach. It's an ethical grid superimposed to strain out the undesirables, and it is identical in spirit to Trump calling unauthorized immigrants rapists and drug dealers, except that instead of shithole countries, the impure skeptical menace, aka Hillary's deplorables, live right next door. Vaccines either work or they don't. If they do, then one is protected, and the vax status of others is irrelevant, no proof required. If they don't work, well, you can't prove a negative, and the risk is fairly distributed. Proof of jab is not about herd immunity. It's about tribal consolidation, and it is blatantly wielded to reinforce the us versus them narrative that keeps the woke in business. The actual threat of COVID, like racism and white supremacy, is insufficient to meet the demands of these holy warriors. They're all dressed up for LARPing, and they need dragons to slay and victims to save. If reality won't oblige by providing enough challenging monsters, they'll just assume the role of dungeon master and write their own adventures, making the rest of us play along with their rules, the most important of which is that you're a monster if they say you're a monster. No saving throw. One of Bruce Cockburn's most remarkable albums is the 1979 masterpiece, Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws. I would love to see him perform those songs, but apparently it's unnecessary to go to the Academy of Music. I'm already feeling the bite. An addendum. Amnesty inter alia. Months after I wrote the essay above and others for the disasters of woke, it seems impossible to complete my entries for this book. The examples of madness aggregate faster than they can be documented and are self-obscuring through sheer volume and velocity. Before one concern can be fully addressed, another has taken its place, to say nothing of those that are retroactively erased from the cultural record to avoid accountability. Wokeness is its own force multiplier, like a zombie horde that reproduces itself by partially devouring its victims. The ghost of Hegel haunts this hysterical movement and our historical moment. The great idealist philosopher's concept of the Aufheben, taken up ecstatically by the critical theorists of the Frankfurt School in the early 20th century and redeployed adroitly by the woke, see James Lindsay, describes precisely what we are undergoing, a purposive negation that is also seen as a preservation and as an exalting. In this case, using the institutions of Western civilization to tear down the West and build back better, according to the utopian imagos of the woke. For instance, the recent call for COVID amnesty by Emily Oster in The Atlantic, which not only perpetuates a disabling fiction about the handling of the pandemic, but reinscribes the rights of the woke to abuse power with impunity for the sake of the collective good, as the woke presume to define it. Deploying the word amnesty is a dead giveaway. Amnesty is political pardon for crimes and violations of laws and rights. This is at once an acknowledgement and a disavowal. Hegelian self-justification, one that leans into the very language of forgiveness that the woke themselves vindictively withhold from their designated enemies. The significant difference being that the COVID skeptics and dissidents from woke identity politics have done nothing wrong. Oster writes, quote, "But the thing is, we didn't know," end quote. That in her class at Brown University, she and her students have been, quote, "discussing the many important choices we had to make under conditions of tremendous uncertainty," end quote. That, quote, "we lacked definitive data on vaccines and that any missteps weren't nefarious," end quote, but were the result of that uncertainty. Well, one thing is certain, the woke are never at fault. Just as definitions of identity can be expanded endlessly to accommodate the demands of professional victims and narcissists, definitions of harm can be strategically redefined to ensure the punishment or the protection of the appropriate party. In her interview with Mary Louise Kelly on NPR's All Things Considered, Oster relates how her masked 4-year-old son shouted at a peer to practice social distance when the other child got too close on an outdoor hike. Her account may be vaguely couched in a kind of regret, but exemplifies how the most intellectually defenseless and the least vulnerable to COVID were brainwashed and weaponized to serve an inconclusive and deceptive narrative blindly followed by callow ideologues for whom it's easier to pass a man with new pronouns into women's private spaces than for a healthy fan to enter the Academy of Music. During the interview, Kelly frames the discussion to emphasize the irrationality of the COVID skeptics. Quote, I want to note that some people did get it wrong. Some people made wildly irresponsible claims during the pandemic, end quote. They surely did. Guess who? But as with other ideological bugaboos of the woke, this obvious claim is directed only at fringe actors whom no sane or intelligent person would be taking seriously. The only people eating Tide Pods live in Tide pools. The blame is never directed at those responsible for the lies and half-truths which, repeated, authenticated themselves in the minds of the craven and the credulous, and polarized the country into irreconcilable factions over an illness from which 98% or better fully recover if they are not elderly or already unhealthy. The social sequelae of this therapeutic misadventure will haunt us for a generation. As Bill Maher observed, quote, the pandemic erased 2 decades of progress in math and reading. This pisses me off. The pandemic didn't do that. The way we handled the pandemic did that. ACT scores are the lowest in 30 years. Anxiety and depression way up. The body mass index doubled for kids 2 to 19. Drug overdoses, murder deaths way up. Inflation on a 40-year high. Domestic violence increased. And my favorite, car crashes went way, way up. And finally, the experts said, you know what this is? People just went fucking mental. End quote. Not to mention loved ones dying separated from their families due to quarantine, people unable or fearfully unwilling to seek necessary medical care and checkups, and those who lost their livelihoods due to a politically unpopular but eminently sane, and yes, scientific skepticism about the origins of the virus and the safety and efficacy of the recommended methods for treating and preventing its transmission. The Great Barrington Declaration was authored on October 4th, 2020, and to date, it was November 14th, 2022 when I wrote this essay, has nearly 1 million signatories. It advocated for focused protection out of concern for physical and mental health risks likely to occur under conditions of lockdown, long-term masking, and social stresses related to vaccine policies. While acknowledging the reality of COVID, the statement, drafted by epidemiologists from Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford, also emphasizes that risks of contraction and serious symptoms are not evenly distributed. Therefore, a more balanced approach to protection would allow those with minimal risk to pursue their lives with minimal disruption. As Oster's commentary itself suggests, alongside comprehensive global data on lockdowns and other preventative measures, COVID policy, not SARS-CoV-2, has been the real, unequivocal public health catastrophe. Oster herself concedes, quote, the pandemic created many problems we still need to solve, end quote, and that answering key questions is, quote, how we will help our children recover, end quote. Her repeated pleas to forgive and forget, to fund future solutions and not fret over past mistakes would be more credible and more welcome if they didn't simultaneously contradict and reiterate the ethos of the woke. Life is an endless power struggle between inherently good and evil people, read Pure versus Infected. Oppression is historical and systemic and must be exposed and challenged, read Contagion is everywhere and extreme measures must be taken. And there is no true redemption, only endless genuflective work and passing the power. Read endless boosters, masking, vax passports, and outsourcing individual choice to an elite who always knows what's best. It's as if the invisible hand of the Hegelian absolute spirit endlessly erases and rewrites the same message in a new font. The COVID pandemic response and the identity politics of which it partook and which it perpetuated are decidedly of the woke, by the woke, for the woke. So, in that spirit, it seems right and proper that there should be a reckoning before any talk of amnesty. Where I live in the so-called Happy Valley of western Massachusetts, there are still a great many people, most of whom are not elderly, obese, or obviously unwell, going about in masks, and who were doing so even during the dog days of a sweltering summer outdoors on bikes and on hiking trails. Many of them are under 30. Some of them are children. Some businesses still require masks for entry. Remember, I wrote this in 2022, but some of this is, in fact, still going on. Some businesses still require masks for entry when you can find them open, with no exceptions. I personally know several people who have scarcely eaten out or attended a concert or public event in almost 3 years. This isn't an abundance of caution. It's a secondary infection, a mind virus caused by exposure to a mendacious narrative. The technical term for this condition is iatrogenesis, an adverse outcome caused by a medical intervention. Clinical literature identifies 3 primary types of iatrogenic outcomes: clinical, social, and cultural, with a 4th type, technological, considered consequential. The downstream effects of the COVID pandemic qualify for all of these. Well, if a cure can cause an illness, then exposure can be a treatment. It is time to fully unmask the machinations of the socially and medically woke, practice some serious exposure therapy, and get back to a sane and healthy engagement with the world and each other. The word amnesty comes from the Greek amnestia, which means forgetfulness. The cultural hell ignited by the ideological zealots of the woke cult should never be forgotten. But what is most in need of remembering is that there is a place within us where, in time, it might be forgiven. I close with another quote. You read the Bible in your special ways. You're fond of quoting certain things it says, mouth full of righteousness and wrath from above. But when do we hear about forgiveness and love? Bruce Cockburn, Gospel of Bondage, from Big Circumstance, 1988. Remember, if you enjoy the content here on the Diogenes podcast, please like and subscribe and tell your friends to join the pack. Also, share your thoughts in the comments section, but do so respectfully. We believe in free speech here on the Diogenes podcast, but slurs are not arguments, and trolling is not a meaningful contribution to discourse. And besides, that's my fucking job. Until next time, I'm Chris. Thanks for joining me.